Everyone. How about let's do the back part of the room. Good morning, everyone. All right, that's a little better. If you have a Bible, and I pray that you do, because you're going to need it, let's turn to Matthew chapter 18. If this is your first time in church, the big numbers are chapters, the small numbers are verses. We're in the 18th one, and that's where we'll be at today. If you don't have a Bible, just look on with the person next to you. He or she probably has a copy, and just read along with them. We are almost finished with the first month of 2019. That's ridiculous. It's like, wow, how did 1 month go? So welcome. I'm glad that you have taken the time out on the Sunday morning to be here. And if you are a Rams fan, I guess you might be praying right now about what's going to happen next week. We'll see what happens. I'm hoping that Tom Brady does not win. He's the GOAT, but he's won too much. Let me share one thing before we dive in, or a couple of things. First thing is, every December, our church does an offering called the Laudium Christmas Offering. That's to support foreign or international missionaries with the International Mission Board, which is the international mission sending agency of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the denomination that our church is a part of. So if you didn't know that, welcome to a Southern Baptist church. So our denomination, every December, we have an offering that all churches participate in to give, and 100% of that goes to supporting the missionaries. So what our denomination does, which is completely different than any other denomination, and I think it's the best, is that we send out full-time missionaries and they don't have to raise their own money. We raise it for them. And so they don't have to worry about money. They just go and they just plant churches and make disciples and share the gospel. And so right now, our denomination is supporting over 3,600 career missionaries. And that's just full-time career. That's not even including the part-time or the interns or other field workers. And our church, last month, we gave about $60,000 to this offering as a church total, okay? And so for those of you who gave, thank you, and let's continue to give to support missions. The next thing is, if you're wondering why I chose these verses, is in the afternoon service, we are doing a series called, for lack of a better term, Let's Learn Together, just learning about different topics. 2 weeks ago, I talked about the sanctity of human life beginning in the womb. So we care about all life as Christians from the womb to the tomb and everything in between from Psalm 139. And last week, being the church anniversary Sunday, we talked about being a disciple. Followers of Jesus help others to follow Jesus. If I'm not helping others to follow Jesus, then I better ask myself, what do I mean when I say that I'm a follower of Jesus? And that was from Matthew 4. So today is the end of this series for in the afternoon service time. And then in February and March, just if you're interested, because I have the mic, in February and March, we'll be digging a little more into the topic of discipleship. And the reason why for that is because that's the theme for our church this year, disciples making disciples, and to coordinate with the Korean side, that's why we're going to do that. And so if we're one church, we should try to, as much as possible, preach through similar themes. Let me share a story. It's a true story. I know because I heard about it and I somewhat witnessed it. So the story goes like this. There were two brothers who got to know each other in college. Brother number one went to college as a freshman, just got used to being there as a freshman. And then going into sophomore year, he met the second brother, brother number two. And brother number two and brother number one got to know each other, and they really connected to the point that they said, hey, let's really dig into this relationship as brothers. And they tried to work out together. Keyword is try. They try to spend time waking up early to read the word and to pray, and just wanted to encourage one another and to really share life deeply as brothers. And the second brother really wanted to do this because he wanted to be a pastor. He said, I really feel led to be a pastor. And so the first brother said, okay, I'll work with you and then I'll support you and all that stuff. Now, as two brothers in college get to know one another, invariably you're going to start talking about deeper things, and one of them being the female species. Okay, ladies, girls, okay, whatever term you want to use. Brother number one, during his sophomore year, got really interested, like basically a crush upon a girl who was a freshman, and they're at the church. So he's telling brother number two, man, I really like this girl. She thinks she's really pretty, and brother number two's like, okay, why don't you go ask her out? And brother number one's like, I can't. Okay, brother number one's like, just whatever, passive aggressive, I don't know. It's just he just couldn't do it. So for a whole year, sophomore year of college, he just didn't muster up the courage to talk to her and say, I like you, I'm interested in you, would you like to go on a date? So now we go into junior year. So when we get into junior year, these two brothers are really getting to know one another even more. And everybody in the church sees it. Like these guys are like locking arms, like brother to brother together. But then lo and behold, something really crazy, which I guess it's like a Korean drama started happening at the church. And you're probably thinking, what are you going to talk about? There was a third brother who nobody knew until it kind of came out. He was secretly dating that freshman girl. Or that girl starting her freshman. Now she's a sophomore. They were secretly dating. But that's not the kicker. This third brother, at the same time, was dating two other girls secretly at the church. This is a true story. Each girl thought, I'm his girl. Secretly dating. We take it to another level. This guy actually met the parents of each of the girls that he was secretly dating at the same time. You're thinking, what? Now it all comes out. So obviously, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of anger, and there's just a lot of things going on. But let's backtrack a little bit. Now, brother number one, he likes this girl. So he tells brother number two, he's really close to it. But at some point, he even told brother number three, the guy who was secretly dating the girl. And so brother number three tells the girl, stop talking to that guy, to brother number one. And lo and behold, the girl starts treating brother number one differently. But brother number one, he's just so mesmerized with her that he doesn't care. He's just like, oh, I really like her, even if she's treating me like whatever. So this goes on. This comes out. Okay, brother number three basically, he gets outed in a sense, and just things happen. But then let's just take it to another level here in this story. Brother number one still hasn't told the girl that he likes her. Now she knows because brother number three told her. And brother number one and brother number two are trying to still, like, okay, what's going to happen, with our college group at our church and all this stuff. And then lo and behold, this happens. Brother number two then starts talking to that girl that brother number one likes and brother number three secretly dated, but they're not together anymore. Okay. Brother number two, then as he's talking to the girl, they start liking each other. So then, brother number two then tells brother number one, brother number one's confided in him for a long time. Hey, we're going to start dating. Brother number one, obviously, is like, what the? Feels a bit betrayed, don't you think? Like stabbed in the back. But then here's the thing. Brother number two says to brother number one and then tells everyone else at the church, this has happened because brother number one wasn't man enough to ask her out. So if he's not man enough to ask her out, I'm just going to ask her out, and so we like each other. So that's his fault. You're thinking, is this true? Yes, this is true. And then, are you one of those? Like, obviously, I'm not brother number three, okay? I didn't have that kind of game to talk to girls, okay? That's not me, okay? Ask my wife. By the grace of God, I'm married, okay? I did nothing, okay? She just accepted me. Now, if you are the first brother number one, what do? Does he forgive the other brother number two, especially because this guy wants to be a pastor? Does he forgive because that's what he was taught? He grew up in church. You got to forgive. Now, as outrageous as this story is, and it's a true story, I think all of us here on some level can relate to the dilemma faced by this guy. You got betrayed by a brother, like the bro code got broken. Now, I doubt you experience it to this, Korean drama type scenario level. Like, man, you can make a drama series out of this. I guess you could. Talk to the people. But every single person sitting in this room, you and I, we have been wronged or offended, right? We have. All of us have been sinned against. It's the nature of life here. So then here's the question that we have to ask ourselves. Will I forgive? Will I forgive? Or will I keep my resentment? Will I keep my anger, my bitterness? Will I keep my hurts? Will I keep my pains, my losses? Now, Merriam-Webster defines forgive like this: to cease to feel resentment against an offender or to give up a claim. Or a synonym is pardon. Now, I'm thinking, as I've been talking right now, a couple of us might be pulling up some mental images of someone who has wronged us in the past through some words or some action. And now I just said it, now all of us are like, oh, I wonder who did it to me. And likely, for some of us, there's still a sting, right? The sting that's still there from that hurt or that offense, whether it was yesterday, last year, or maybe even a decade ago. Now, we might think it's not that big of a deal. All right, okay, people have wronged me. I'm going to show them. But if that's so, right? Okay, that was in the past. Why do I keep still thinking about it? Right? If that's some instant way back in the past and it's still like raw to me, why do I still thinking about, why do I keep replaying it over and over and over in my head? So then the question, am I going to forgive? Now, I think you and I can relate to the question that Peter asked Jesus in verse 21 of Matthew chapter 18. Now, Peter knows that he needs to forgive, but then he still asks Jesus a question anyway. So let's go to verse 21 of chapter 18. And it says this: Then Peter came up and said to him, Jesus, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Now, brother is not meaning a literal bro, like blood brother, but a fellow Christian believer. So Peter is asking what? How long do I have to keep doing this forgiveness thing? And Peter, because he's Peter, he decides to answer his own question. So the second part of verse 21 says what? As many as 7 times? So Peter's question and his kind of question to answer his question shows that he's already learned something about forgiveness. He already has a concept of forgiveness in his mind. And what does his question imply that he already knows? Well, since Peter's a Jew, Jews at that time, in addition to the Bible, they read some other literature called the Mishnah and the Talmud, and one section says this. It's called the Yoma. And it says, if a man sins once, twice, or 3 times, they forgive him. If he sins a 4th time, they do not forgive him. So within Judaism, 3 times was good enough to forgive. After that, no way. Now Peter says what? 7 times. So Peter saying 7 times is him thinking that he's going above and beyond the call of duty and he's being super generous. So way to go, Peter. Good job, right? You doubled the original number and you added 1. Good. But Jesus has a different idea. Verse 22. Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. What's he saying? Is he literally saying, okay, 77 times forgive, but when it gets to number 78, done. No more forgiving. No. He's using hyperbole. Jesus is saying that you and I are to forgive without keeping count. followers of Jesus, that's what a disciple is. We forgive and forgive and forgive and forgive and forgive. And if I'm counting, then I'm not really forgiving. Now here's something to notice. What we've read so far. There's no exception to this command if the other person doesn't say sorry, right? There's nothing like that. I mean, you could try to like do some infrared, I don't know, magic marker. That's not there. So it's not, I forgive only if she asks for it. Rather, I forgive even if he doesn't apologize. Yikes. Doesn't that sound completely ridiculous? Now, if we ask a secular sociologist or psychologist about what to do when we're offended or wronged, they will likely tell us to bring some sort of justice upon that person. You're wrong. You need some justice. I mean, we even think about our criminal justice system. Or they'll tell us the famous words, forgive and forget. But really, that's actually impossible, right? Because you and I don't forget, right? Unless you got amnesia or you got bopped upside the head, you don't forget. That memory has been seared into our minds, has been downloaded into our brains, and it's not going to go away. So Jesus is not telling us to forgive and to forget. He's telling us to keep forgiving with no end in sight. And you don't need to forget when you continue forgiving. That's wild. That's what he's saying here. And because Jesus wants Peter, and he also wants us to really understand what he's getting at, what he's saying, he shares a story. So let's go to verse 23 to read this story that he shares with us. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. Verse 24, when he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. So in this story, this parable, we have a wealthy king with a large kingdom, and he has a lot of servants who handled his money. Now, how do we know that from just reading this? Because he decides, in verse 23, to settle his accounts with every servant that he has. And so while he's conducting this financial audit in verse 24, the king finds a servant who owes him 10,000 talents. And we're not talking about talent like what's a talent? Or how much? It's a unit of measure. It's money. How much is that? Well, in the ESV Bible footnote, it says a monetary unit worth about 20 years' wages. So that's one talent, and you extrapolate that out, 10,000. So some Bible scholars say that if you were to put in today's money, it'd be something like $5, $6 to $10 billion. Billion dollars. That's an outrageous sum of money to hold. Anyone handled $1 billion before? If you do, please tell me. And now here's the thing. This is bad for this servant. Why? Because he's in debt and he owes this much cash. Okay, $6 to $10 billion. Okay, here's a tangent. This is just my personal thing. If any one of you ever become a billionaire, please, 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 please let me ride in your plane. Just once, okay? Like, you're like Tony Stark, you got the plane. I just want to ride in it, please. And here's my second request. Please, please, please buy me courtside tickets to a Lakers game. I want to see a Lakers game before LeBron retires, okay? Please, okay? Here's my request number 3. Please, please, please buy me, just 3 requests. Please, please, please buy me tickets to go see Hamilton live on Broadway. Okay? That's it. If those 3 are filled, I think I'll be kind of happy. And then my wife might ask something. Okay, who knows? Okay, tangent over. Okay, this king is what? He's crazy rich. He's so outrageously wealthy that he's loaned $6 billion to a servant. I mean, that's just crazy. Which probably means that this king, because he's so loaded, he probably has $100+ billion stashed and stored up somewhere. It's like, it's chump change, $6 billion. Okay, his money is never going to run out. This is ridiculous. Now, here's another thing about this story so far. This king is outrageous in his generosity. How do we know that? Because I don't think he just loaned $6 billion to this servant in one lump sum. I don't think that happened. It's more likely that this servant kept approaching the king and asking for loan after loan after loan after loan, and it just kind of totaled up so that debt reached to the billion numbers. That's ridiculous too. Why would you keep loaning a guy money till it gets to the billions? But then here's one more other thing in this story. Is that this servant is outrageously guilty. Verse 25. And since he could not pay, his master, the king, ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. Now, if this servant just took that $6 billion and invested it without too much risk, maybe talked to Andy about financial stuff, accounting, then all he probably needed to do was just sell the assets, sell the properties, sell the goods, return all the borrowed money. We good to go. But he can't pay. It says that. He can't pay, which means what? That he has spent all of this money on himself. He has nothing to give. It's completely gone with an astronomical debt. $6 billion. Now, I don't know about you, but to go from $6 billion to zero, I mean, what do you have to do to spend that much money to the point, I mean, are you just making it rain or are you just throwing money away on the streets? How do you go from 6 billion to zero? That is ridiculous. So in order to make this payment, basically, the king gives the order to take this servant and his family and all his stuff and sell it. Sell it into slavery, basically. Now you're thinking, well, that's so mean. Well, in that time period, in the ancient world, selling people into slavery was a common thing you did if that person couldn't repay his or her debts. It's like, well, we'll just take your life. You're a slave now. Now, obviously, as we're reading this, okay, there's no way the king is getting all his money back, right? It's just not happening. But here's the thing. The punishment is still going to be bad to him in a sense. It's going to be brutal because you're going to be a slave. So Jesus is telling us that there's an extreme amount of grace flowing out from this king to this servant. Grace is given, right, in the form of money after money after money after money. And at the same time, there is an extreme amount of guilt from this servant back to the king because he's abused this grace. Basically, he's squandered this money. So that's the situation that we're in. Okay? You can't pay up, you're going to be a slave. Now what happens next? Verse 26. So the servant fell on his knees, imploring him, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything." So the servant, in desperation, begs for patience to pay everything back. All right, let's use some common sense. Can this guy really pay back everything to the king? No. So this request is unrealistic, outrageous, and it's a broken promise, DOA. Dead on arrival. It's not happening. What a foolish thing to ask, right? So the king is unhappy. You messed with his money, and now you're asking for more time to pay him back everything? Well, did you just pull an all-nighter or like sleep wrong to ask for such foolish nonsense? Now, if you're the king, what do? Why you? But let's go to verse 27, see how this king responds. And out of pity for him, compassion, the master of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. Okay, this story has gone from outrageous to downright silly. Okay, forgive a $6 billion debt? You sure? Well, the king's like, yeah, because I have compassion on this guy. But he just did all that. You sure? Yeah, because I have lots more. I have tons more. I'm good. I'm going to forgive him and cancel out, wipe out all his debts. Clean slate. Now, if you're the servant in this story, how do you react? That's right. No, you would be, I think, and I would be, I think, elated, overjoyed. Thank you so much, sir. Honey, we're saved. Well, why? Because the massive debt was forgiven. It's gone. You are not guilty anymore. Now, if I've been forgiven such a large, huge debt, I think I would treat others differently, no? But as we read on, we see that this servant guy does exactly the opposite. Verse 28, he says this, "But when that same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, and seizing him, he began to choke him, saying, 'Pay what you owe.'" Now, how much money are we talking about here? Well, a denarius was about 1 day's wages. So some scholars say it's about a few $1,000s. I mean, it's not chump change, but it's not too high, but it's not compared to 6 billion. I mean, big difference. So this first servant, who's forgiven by the king, turns around, finds another servant, grabs him, seizes him, chokes him, I don't know, USC hold, and says, "Pay me, I'm collecting. Pay me up." And then we have to wonder, did you just forget that you were forgiven billions and now you're demanding thousands from someone next to you? It's weird. Verse 29. "So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you.'" Now, if you're paying attention, this sounds kind of similar to verse 26, right? Because verse 26, the first servant says, "I'm going to pay back all $6 billion. That's impossible. And here in verse 29, the second servant says that he will repay a few thousands, which, if you really think about it, it's doable and it's reasonable. But the first servant, he doesn't care. Verse 30, "He refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt." Wow. So the first servant, with no thought to the forgiveness that he has just received from the king, consciously refuses to extend any forgiveness, any mercy to a fellow servant. So after being washed over by a tsunami of grace from this king, this servant only cares about justice. I want what's right. Now, but here's the question. Did the first servant have the right to collect money from the second? Yes, thank you. Yes, he did. But did this servant really have to collect the money? No, not really. Because he's just been forgiven a debt so crippling and so outrageous that he's free. He's free. So then, if you're free, why then would you want to shackle another person when you have the opportunity to give what has already just been given to you? Does that make sense? But this servant had pride. He had pride. He wanted, he craved, he desired what was owed to him. Mine. He could have forgiven, but he didn't. He should have forgiven. And you know what? So can we. But you and I might answer, but think about what's been done to me. Right? If we kind of replay it for all of us in our lives, this person, what he or she did, said, no. But that's not the point. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying, if I've received forgiveness from the infinite bank of grace from God, then I can forgive others in his name. I can tap into this forgiveness and forgive. That's what Jesus is trying to drive at to our hearts. Now let's see how this story concludes. Verse 31. When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed. They were upset. And they went and reported to their master, the king, all that had taken place. Verse 32. Then his master summoned him and said to him, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you?" So the other servants see what happens between the first and second. They're upset and they tell the king. So the king then brings the first servant back. He scolds him, the forgiven servant, and he calls him wicked. And what's the king saying? Hey, you should have been imitating me in how much I forgave you. And how much debt did I forgive of yours? All of it, right? So why are you doing this? What's Jesus telling Peter? What's Jesus telling us? Okay, God is the most holy, beautiful, awesome being in the universe, the only one, and he's been sinned against by all of us, and we've sinned against him the greatest. Welcome to church. Okay, you and I are not that holy. We're not. We're sinners, and we have been sinned against the least, especially when compared to an awesome God. So shouldn't we forgive because we've been forgiven by God? We forgive as God forgives us. Or another way to put it, forgiven people can forgive. Now, verse 34. And in anger, his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. Now, will this servant ever pay off all his debts? No. So he's going to be in jail a long time. It's going to be torturous, and this punishment is forever. Very fun stuff. Now, let's really think about what's happened in this story that Jesus has just told to all of us. Okay, this servant has received ultimate grace to forgive his ultimate debt. But after receiving this ultimate grace from the king, this first servant, just gives out justice when he could have and should have given out grace. And because he refused to forgive, the servant in response receives ultimate justice from the king. Which means this first servant, never really understood the concept of grace. He didn't know how to give it. He didn't know how to give grace because he couldn't give what had been given to him. He didn't understand that. The king forgave a massive debt of money, but the king didn't forgive when he saw that that servant had an unforgiving heart. Now, Jesus says in Matthew 6, 14, 15, his Sermon on the Mount, this: For if you forgive others their trespasses, their sins, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. And you know what? Jesus, in the last verse of our passage today, says similar words to conclude his story. Verse 35. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. Ooh. Jesus isn't mincing any words. He's giving a warning to us. If I don't forgive, I won't be forgiven. Now, if we're thinking, is Jesus saying, my forgiving earns my forgiveness? Of course not. Because today's story showed that's not true. The servant received forgiveness first. Okay? Is Jesus suggesting that I can lose my salvation, be kicked out, if I don't forgive? No. The New Testament is clear that that's not the case. It's not. So what's Jesus getting at here? What's he trying to talk about? He's talking about our hearts. Did you catch that? Verse 35. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. So we won't be forgiven unless we genuinely forgive from our hearts. Now, is this in our hearts? Because I know it's not in mine. And my wife would readily confirm it. Now, I don't know about you, but I can easily replay actually in my mind lots of past offenses against me. It's like easy. Ooh. Which then, if you're like me, it just raises that anger in your heart. So it's like, because I'm Korean, like kimchi temper or K-rage or whatever you want to call it, it just comes up. And then when I think about those things, I don't want to forgive. Because I'm upset. And you know what? If I'm in that, nothing good is going to come in the long run if I just kind of sit there and sulk. And I still do it all the time. Now, we might think, okay, like All right. We might think, after reading this, it's easy for God to forgive us, of course, because His grace is infinite. He's an infinite being. I'm finite. I'm not God. I can't do what He said. I can't do it. Well, think back to the story. Just like the king, like we think, okay, this king, he can forgive the servant, so that's easy, but I'm like the servant. I can't do that. Or is that fair? Right? Why is God asking me to do something only really He can do? But here's the thing. When we forgive, it's not just from our hearts. It's not, I am just doing it out of my own self. When I forgive, as Jesus calls me to, I am plugging into God's own heart to draw out His infinite grace and mercy and dish that out to other people. And when we forgive others, we're asking them to carry forward this forgiveness as well. Carry it forward. But if we can't forgive, if I don't want to forgive, then we're probably not connected to the source of forgiveness, God Himself. It's a heart issue. Your heart and my heart. So you don't be thinking, well, you just think, no, I'm like, this is hard as I'm preaching this. So here's the point. Forgiven people can forgive. But if we want to boil it down, forgiven people forgive. Forgiven people forgive. So the supernatural grace I receive from God can be given to others in Jesus' name. That's what Jesus is getting at. Now, let's go back to that story I shared at the beginning, the Korean drama story. Okay. So this first brother, right, has had all this. This girl kind of did stuff to him, the third brother and the second brother. So this first brother's like, oh my gosh, right? So you're going through like different stages. Like you're shocked, you're confused, and then anger starts boiling up. But then to the girl, the first brother meets the girl and then he forgives her. The first brother then meets up with the third brother and he forgives him and actually starts trying to reach out to that third brother because all the other friends abandoned him because they got mad and says, hey, I'm still going to love you. But to the second brother, that first brother can't forgive him because that second brother keeps saying stuff. So that first brother is like trying to figure it out. And then what happens? That second brother actually transfers to a different school. Says, forget you all, I'm gone. So this first brother now is just still thinking, so he's trying to talk to people, trying to pray, and he's having a hard time to let this go, to forgive. But finally, at some point, as people continue to talk to him, he decides, you know what, I have to forgive this guy. But then the moment of truth comes. A couple of years later, the second brother comes and visits the school. It comes to a large group gathering of the campus ministry, and the first brother sees him. So the first brother and now the second brother are there in the same area. So naturally, if you're kind of in this group, you're going to have to say hi to each other. Right? It should be cordial. And so here's the moment. What's going to happen? The second brother approaches the first brother and says, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the hurt I've done to you. I think I've realized now how much I did to you. And the first brother says, that's right. You're wrong. No. The first brother says, you know what, I'm sorry too. I'm sorry too. Now, are those two brothers like chummy friends as they once were? No, they're not. They're not. So, and they don't really see each other that often. There are actually both those two brothers were at a wedding a couple of years ago, and they didn't really get to talk to each other. And so the first brother, he feels a little bad about that. Now, why do I say that? Because that first brother's me. So I'm the guy in this story. I was offended. I was sinned against. All this stuff happened to me. I needed to forgive, but I did not want to forgive. Thankfully, by God's grace, I have come to that point, but it's not one and done. I'm done. No, I have to still. Even as I'm talking about this, like the emotions still are like coming up. I have to keep forgiving. Forgiven people, forgive. Sounds easy, right? But, the reality is this is hard, right? It's really hard. Yeah, maybe this person, I can forgive him or her. But this person, you serious? No. No. That person hasn't learned yet. Why? And I myself, even now, not that brother that I've kind of reconciled with, but other people, it's right now in my mind. These people. And you're thinking, you're a pastor. Well, yeah, okay, I'm a messed up pastor, okay? I need some counseling, right? I still got stuff in my heart. And I would suppose you too, all of us. Okay, part of me, as I picked this passage, I didn't even want to preach these verses because it's too personal for all of us. Okay? Even my wife was getting on me. Like, you're going to preach about this? Right? And you hold grudges. I'm like, yeah, I do. I do. And I hold an advice. I have a hard time letting it go. I do. C.S. Lewis says this about forgiveness. Every one of us says forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive. And then to mention the subject at all is to be greeted with howls of anger. Now, when he wrote this is right after World War II and the Holocaust. There's a lot of sin and forgiveness in that. Okay, so then why? More than just, okay, Jesus tells us to do it. Why forgive? Why can't we? Why should we? Why must we forgive? Okay, if we go back to the foundation of everything, the gospel, think about Jesus. On the cross, what was one of the things that he said? Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. So the only person in the history of humanity who didn't need to forgive, because he's perfect, he chose to forgive. That's me and you. And if Jesus forgave me, I can forgive others. That's what he's trying to get at. Now, okay, if I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm called to do this every single day of my life. Yes, some days are better than others. Other days are ridiculously worse. Yet it is something you and I are to strive to do. And forgiveness is ultimately about absorbing the pain and the hurt and the punishment that others have caused upon us as a reflection of all that we've caused upon Jesus. That's what we're called. That's what it means to be a follower of Christ. To display to the world on a smaller level what he's done on a cosmic level to us. Forgiven people forgive. I still got to learn this. I'm going to ask the praise team to come up. Just want to close